Hello, and welcome to A Postdoc's Journal, the show that takes you through my journey into and eventually out of academia as a postdoctoral research scientist. My name is Simit Patel. Hello, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome back to those of you who may have listened to the show before, and a very warm welcome to those of you who may be listening for the very first time. If you don't already know, this podcast is based on my own personal journal. In each episode, I read out a journal entry from about 11 or 12 years ago, back when I was working in academia as a postdoc, as a research scientist. Then I reflect on it, I analyze it, I try to make sense of it, and share my thoughts with you today with the benefit of a decade or so of hindsight. If you are someone who can relate to things like imposter syndrome, loneliness, and just mental health challenges in the workplace, whether you're in academia or not, I hope that by sharing my own personal experience with you, it helps you to feel a little bit less alone. In today's episode, we jump to July 2014, about 1 month after the last episode. At this point, the research institute I worked at had passed an evaluation for the next funding round, and I was given a 6-month extension to my contract, which I kind of knew I was going to get, but no one could actually promise it to me at the time. This journal entry was following the annual Barn Seminar, which was a semi-formal meeting that my boss would do at his house, or more specifically, in a small barn at the back of his house. The whole research group would get together and we would give short presentations and just give a summary of what we're working on and what we plan to be working on in the future, followed by a barbecue. I can remember actually being quite nervous about this at the time, which is a shame. It was actually a really nice idea, and if I had been in a better place mentally, I think I would have just enjoyed it all more, and I kind of regret that I didn't enjoy it as much. Before I read out the journal entry, if you've listened to the show before and you've liked it and you found it interesting, I would really appreciate it if you could take just 1 minute of your time to leave a review or some stars or hearts or thumbs or whatever you use to show your appreciation wherever you are listening to this. If you normally subscribe and follow things, please subscribe and follow this podcast too. I've also started a Reddit channel where you can join the conversation. Links to everything are in the show notes. Have a listen now to the journal reading, and I'll be back at the very end to share my thoughts with you after 12 years of hindsight. Enjoy. July 18th, 2014. At the Barn Seminar a few weeks ago, the loose career plan my boss and I came up with was to 1. Finish the snail paper, 2. Write the DFG proposal to fund myself, and 3. Finish the fish project and publish it. I was having a drink with my boss and one of his collaborators from the UK 2 days ago, and my boss revealed that he actually couldn't rehire me after my initial 2-year contract. His professor contract states that he can have one postdoc on a 2-year contract, but he is not allowed to rehire the same person after the initial 2-year contract. The idea is to get someone new every 2 years, to give everyone a chance and to keep people and ideas moving around. This got me thinking about how the system is rigged against you from the start. The academic structure means that it was never even possible for me to have any job security from the very beginning. I think my boss was able to extend my contract through various loopholes. There were some extra pools of money that were made available for those interim periods when the Research Institute was being evaluated. This means that there is really no way I can possibly get an extension beyond December 2014. Thus, it all hinges on me getting my own funding. I've been rethinking this a little bit. I have to be realistic about my chances. I haven't built up enough of a profile and/or ideas to have my own research grant. Not yet. I'm not there yet in my development. I need more time. I think being pressured into going for a research grant is the wrong reason to get a research grant. I'm starting to think the next 6 months of my time would be better spent finishing the fish project and getting a really good publication out of it. Then I would have walked away from a less than 3-year postdoc with 2 first author publications and 1 second author publication. That would feel like a success and puts me in a stronger position to apply for a grant after that. 2 problems with that come to mind. 1, it gives me a tight deadline to get all those loose ends tied up before the end of the year. And 2, I would then have to leave Frankfurt in about 5 months, and I do want to stay into next year. I have nowhere else to go, frankly. Ideally, it would be nice to have a bit of a cushion going into next year, so I can finish the fish project fully, finish my postdoc strongly, make sure my PhD student has everything she needs, and look for another postdoc. But trying to get that cushion puts me back to square one. I need to apply for some funding. But I know I'm unlikely to be successful at this stage, so why bother wasting my time? I tried looking for funding opportunities today, but it kept coming back to A, needing an outstanding research idea, and B, lots of publications. 2 things I don't have. My gut is telling me I need to finish the work I started here, get those publications, then find another postdoc position. Finding another postdoc feels like the most likely way for me to stay in academia. With 3 years of postdoc experience plus 3 publications, I can make a pretty strong application for an advertised postdoc position. But even beyond that next postdoc position, I'm not sure I'll be in a strong position to get a fellowship or anything. I would have 4 to 5 years of postdoc and maybe 3 or 4 publications in total. I think I'm starting to get a bit beyond, i.e. too old to just take it as it comes and see where things take me. Up until this point in life, I never really thought beyond the next step. This is the first time I'm thinking about the next step after the next step. Maybe that's the key. Maybe I need to decide what I want for the long term, and that will make it clear what I need to do in the short term. A thought for another time, perhaps. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. As usual, I've written down some thoughts after reading that back and hearing that back. What struck me about this journal entry is how committed I seemed to trying to stay in academia. I'd actually forgotten that my path out of academia wasn't a straight line. There was actually a lot of back and forth between wanting to leave and thinking about staying in academia. And in this journal entry, I was only thinking about staying in academia. There are a few things I want to unpack from this journal entry. I want to explore how it can be easy to fall into this sort of victim mindset when you feel like the academic system is against you. I want to talk about how sometimes your gut feeling tells you to do one thing, but the world around you wants to push you to do something else. And this journal entry, I think, also highlights some deeper problems in academia as well. Before we get into the reflection, I want to ask you a quick question. Do you ever worry about your paper being rejected because the English isn't good enough? One thing I've always been good at is writing, but I know not everyone finds that easy. Perhaps English isn't your first language, or for some reason, the words you write just don't quite capture what you want to say. Good English can enhance your scientific credibility, increase the chance of your article being accepted, and speed up the peer review process. Whether you're a research scientist, a scientific writer, or part of a dynamic biotech company, I want to help you with my professional copy editing and proofreading services for scientific English. Enhancing the clarity and precision of writing has been an integral part of my professional life in academia and in the biotech industry for over a decade. If you need a native English speaker with a solid scientific background and a professional certification in proofreading to refine and polish your writing, I would love to help you. Please visit simitpatel.com, that's simitpatel.com for more information. Thank you, and now back to the show. So I learned that my boss wasn't actually allowed to extend my contract, and I was only ever supposed to work as a postdoc in his group for 2 years. There was a specific rule that actually stopped him from doing that. So in other words, that lack of long-term prospects and any sort of job security was very much baked into the job from the very start. At the time, I felt like this was a sign that the whole academic system was rigged against me. And it was intentionally made difficult for me to kind of win. At the time, I felt like I was intentionally being given less time than I actually needed to achieve everything I needed to achieve to be successful. It was like I was given 4 to 5 years worth of work, and to make sure I failed at it, I was being given 2 years to do it. Up until this point in my academic career, I had never heard anything about these sorts of rules before. I always knew that there was a lack of job security and long-term prospects in academia, but I wasn't aware that there were these specific rules in place to set you up for failure rather than for success. When I revisited this point, it got me thinking a bit about victim mentality. For most of the journal entries in this podcast, I blamed myself for everything. For the most part, I believed that the problems I was experiencing were because I was inherently not good enough. In other words, I was placing all of the blame for my problems inward, and it was all on me. But in this entry, I was talking about myself as if I was a victim of this evil academic system, a system that conspired against me and behind my back tried to devise a secret plan to make sure I failed. In other words, I was placing the blame for my problems externally and creating a narrative where I was the victim. The way I made sense of this piece of information I got about my boss not being able to extend my contract beyond 2 years was to make that information fit this narrative that the academic system was against me and I was somehow being exploited and set up for failure. I actually think there are grains of truth in both perspectives. There were, of course, internal and external reasons why I was not having the success that I wanted to have at the time. Internally, there was probably something about the way I was working that just didn't lend itself to being able to churn out papers at a very quick rate. Externally, the funding structures and the culture in academia absolutely does not set you up for success. I think the problems arise when we think about things in extremes. I think we do have a tendency to exaggerate these things and almost invent stories that are simply not true. Instead of just, realizing that I prefer to work in a different way, I would take that to the extreme and think that I wasn't good enough. I was inherently flawed as a person. I was a failure. And of course, none of that is true because that's an extreme exaggeration. And when I looked externally, yes, the funding structures and culture are maybe not optimal for setting you up for success, but I would take that to its extreme and turn myself into a victim of some evil conspiracy where academia was intentionally and maliciously trying to make me fail. Again, because that's an extreme exaggeration, that's not true either. So I think the way I made sense of this stupid 2-year rule was just an example of that extreme thinking. While I do still agree that academia does have a whole bunch of stupid rules that don't really give you the support you need to succeed, thinking of myself as a victim was probably going too far. At the very least, this rule that my boss couldn't extend my contract beyond 2 years under normal circumstances probably should have been explained to me before I started, not when I was into my 3rd year of my postdoc. I guess I got lucky in the end. There were some loopholes that allowed me to get this privileged 5-month extension followed by a privileged 6-month extension to my contract. In this journal entry, I went on to be really honest with myself about feeling like I wasn't really ready to write a grant application. I honestly felt like I hadn't reached that point in my development where the next step felt like getting my own research grant. I wanted to just focus on doing the research and completing the projects that were in front of me. I felt a bit like I was being pressured into writing a grant, and I thought that that was the wrong reason to be doing it. With hindsight, this was 100% accurate, and I completely agree with everything I wrote then. I am pleased that I was able to be that honest with myself, and I was able to articulate it and get it out of my head somewhere. But the problem was, I couldn't share that with anyone. It felt like a secret I just couldn't tell anyone. I was too afraid and too ashamed to express this to another person. I couldn't tell my boss or any of my colleagues because I was too afraid that they would think that I'm not motivated, that I'm lazy, I'm just trying to get out of writing a grant application. I felt that people outside of academia just wouldn't understand. A few times where I did try to explain it to friends outside of academia, I would, have to explain the rules of academia to them first, and they still wouldn't really get it. And I never really had that kind of support, certainly not the emotional support from anyone in my family. So at the time, I never really had any kind of safe space where I could share these things and not be judged. I had to wait 12 years and start a bloody podcast before I was actually able to talk about any of this. So I felt very isolated and lonely because of this. The best thing I could do was write in my journal, just as a way of getting it out, which was helpful for formulating my thoughts, but it's really not the same as sharing it with someone. It is interesting, when I was reviewing this journal entry, when I was revisiting that feeling of being forced to move forward with a grant application when I knew deep down I just wasn't ready and it wasn't right for me, it reminded me of being stuck in a bad relationship. The circumstances are different, obviously, but the feeling in my body and in my gut is actually very similar. It's the feeling of being trapped in a bad situation that just isn't good for you. But there is still this distant belief that it might work out somehow and be okay in the future, but you also know that it probably won't. The pain of leaving that situation just seems too much, so you end up just moving forward and just go along with things because that's the path of least resistance. This also continues one of the topics from the previous episode where your gut feeling can sometimes tell you one thing, but the world around you is just pushing you to do something else that you don't want to do. I knew what I felt in my gut, and I actually articulated it very clearly. I wanted to focus on finishing my projects and make sure my PhD student who I was mentoring was okay, and maybe apply for some postdocs as well. Those were my priorities. I really didn't want to write a grant application. And since then, I can think of several times where my gut feeling has been in conflict with what I'm actually doing. There have been times where I have followed my gut a bit more. I've usually ended up poorer, but in the long run, I have ended up with fewer regrets. The times where I am in conflict with my gut, I'm usually better off financially, but I definitely have worse mental health. It's actually quite rare that my gut, my head, and my heart are all aligned. I suppose on some level, that's really what I'm chasing and trying to figure out in my life. Related to this point of wanting to focus on finishing research rather than spending all my time writing grant applications, this is one of the classic chicken and egg problems in academia. You need to prioritize the research to write the papers to increase your chances of getting grants. But at the same time, you need to prioritize writing the grant applications in order to have the funding to do the research. When I reflect on this chicken and egg paradox today, I honestly don't know what I could have done differently. For me, it's a chicken and egg problem. It's inherently unsolvable. On an institutional level, as far as I can tell, no one seems to have solved this problem in academia either. I'm not even sure if funding bodies or universities even realize that this is an inherent problem that needs a solution. Today, I just feel a sense of relief when I think about this, a sense of relief that I no longer work in academia. I don't have to deal with this problem anymore. It feels good. In this entry, I wrote about how I was thinking more long-term and more strategically with my planning, and I attributed this to my age. I was no longer happy to just take things as it comes, like I did through school and through all my education and my early 20s. I was reaching a point where I wanted to have more of a long-term plan, more of a strategy, more of a long-term stability and security. I was in my late 20s at the time when I wrote this, and with hindsight, I'm in my 40s now. I don't think this need for long-term planning and stability is something that increases proportionally with age. When I look back on the last decade or so, or a little bit longer, I think I've gone through different phases of needing stability and a fixed plan, and I've gone through other phases of just being okay with taking it as it comes. So perhaps that isn't fully driven by age alone. There's other factors at play. What surprised me when I reviewed this journal entry was all of my thinking in this entry was about how to stay in academia. I was making active plans for figuring out how I could possibly stay. Most of the journal entries up until this point have been around flirting with the idea of leaving, but it seemed at this point I was quite committed to finding a way to stay and continue in academia. Today, this makes me feel somewhat satisfied. A journal entry like this reminds me that I made a genuine effort to try to make it work in academia. If I hadn't put the effort in to try to make it work, I might have felt a sense of regret that I didn't even try. But today, I feel satisfied that I tried, and here's the evidence for it. With hindsight, I think the effort that I put in to try and make it work in academia actually put me in a better position to eventually leave academia. It meant that I could leave with as fewer regrets as possible. Leaving something with as few regrets as possible is really the best way to leave anything. So there you have it. I'd actually forgotten that there were actually moments where I genuinely wanted to try and stay in academia, and I made an earnest attempt to try and do that. This journal entry reminded me of that. It also reminded me of why I'm glad I left. In the next episode, we have a bit of a time jump to September 2014, well into the third year of my postdoc. At this point, I had about 4 months left on my contract, and I was trying to execute this plan to try and write a grant application and get all my research done and analyze all my data and publish all the papers all at the same time. Trying to get all of that done in the time frame I had was basically like trying to solve an impossible problem. I'm a problem solver, but this one had me stumped. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that was valuable for you in some small way. And until next time, please be kind to yourself.
Brood about it, brood until the day, one day I will find the words to say.
Thanks again for listening to A Postdoc's Journal. I've been your host, Simit Patel. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others who you think might find it helpful and interesting. You could also leave a review over at Podchaser or on Apple Podcasts. If you can relate to anything in this episode, or if you have your own take on that journal entry, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Reddit. Links to all my social media are in the show notes. Thanks again.